Caleb, we started back now? All right. Sounds like I'm on. Everybody doing okay this evening? Well, if you have your Bibles, let's go to Judges chapter 19. Judges chapter 19. Appreciate Brad covering for me last week. Freshly getting out of the hospital that he covered for me. So Judges 19, we're going to finish the last three chapters and finally be through with the book of Judges. And Lord willing, next week we'll begin to look at the book of Ruth. So Judges 19. Let me lead us in prayer. We'll get started. Father, we just thank you for letting us come this evening to study your word. And I thank you for everybody that's gathered here this evening. And I just pray you would guide us tonight in your word. And even in these last three chapters of Judges that we read about a lot of violent and honestly disgusting things that were going on in Israel with your people, Father. We just ask that we can learn from it and so that we don't go down the same path, Father. Help us to always be obedient, loving you, following you, obeying you, as we always should, so that we don't stray from you as they did during this time in their history. Father, we thank you for the way you bless us. We thank you for all that you do for us. And it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen. So, Judges 19, 20 and 21. You're in for a treat, like you haven't already been in for some treats already in the book of Judges. You probably don't remember this because it's been 3 weeks now, I guess. But I told you when we started chapter 17, or when we went through 17 and 18, I told you the last 5 chapters of the book of Judges are kind of like an appendix to the book of Judges. They're not chronological. They don't add to the story chronologically, if you will. They give us some context as far as what it was like during the times of the judges. In fact, if you had to place the time period for these 5 chapters, I would put them pretty close to the beginning of the book of Judges. The book of Judges covers a time period of about 350 to 400 years of their history, and it's right after the life of Joshua. Remember, Joshua was a good guy. He was a great leader. He was a moral leader. He took Moses' place. Moses died. Joshua takes over. He leads them across the Jordan River. He leads them to conquer the promised land, and he divides the tribes up into their tribal allotments. The only bad thing is that although they conquer their enemy for the most part, they don't occupy all the land. They don't annihilate the Canaanites like they were supposed to. So there's still Canaanites living in a lot of the land. But Joshua dies, and then that begins the period of the Judges. And almost immediately, we read in the book of Judges that there's no king and everybody does what's right in their own eyes. In fact, that's a repeated phrase as we go through the book of Judges, that they do what's right in their own eyes. So these last 5 chapters form 2 stories. 17 and 18 is one story. 19 and 20 and 21 is a second story. And like I said, I think they both go toward the beginning of the book. And the reason I say that is there's 2 people mentioned. In 17 and 18, that first story, the grandson of Moses is mentioned. So that tells us that's pretty early in the book of Judges, or at least the time period of the Judges. And in this last story, in chapters 19 through 21, the grandson of Aaron, Moses' brother, is mentioned. And so again, that would put it fairly early, within just a couple of generations of Moses and Aaron. So these happened fairly early. Just to remind you of the story from the last time, chapter 17 and 18, it was about a family, or about a man named Micah, not Micah the prophet. He's a good guy. But this guy named Micah lived with his mama, stole from his mama. Remember, he stole all the silver from his mom. And then he brought it back after she confronted him. And then they melted some of it down to create an idol to worship. They were idol worshipers. And he created an idol, really a temple, I guess you could say, in their home. And then he came across a Levite that was just wandering around, somebody, that should have been part of the priesthood, and hires him to be his priest, his personal priest, even though he doesn't live far from where the tabernacle is set up and the real priesthood exists. So he has his own gods that he worships, false gods, and he has his own priesthoods. So that's chapter 17. Then chapter 18, we have the tribe of Dan on the move. Dan is supposed to live down south in Israel, but they don't conquer all of their territory. The Philistines are giving them a hard time. So they're moving north. They want to live somewhere else. And the leadership of Dan pass by Micah's house, and they see the idols he has. They see the priest that he has. They go, you know what? We need a God to worship. I guess Yahweh's not good enough. And we need our own priesthood. And so they pay this priest to go with them, and they take the idols from Micah, and they move up north to a new area that they will live in, that will be the territory Dan lives in. And so that was chapter 18. So now we get to chapters 19 through 21, and there's just pure anarchy in the country. It really shows you how bad things were in Israel during the time of the judges, and you're kind of scratching your head when you read these 3 chapters, and you're thinking, okay, what's the worst part of the story? But the truth is, it's all bad stuff. It's all bad stuff. And Judges 19 is almost equivalent to Genesis 19. Now, Genesis 19, if you'll recall, 2 angels go and visit Abraham. They come and disguise themselves in human flesh. They visit Abraham, and then they go to the city of Sodom, and they stay with Lot. And you remember what happened that night they stayed with Lot? The men of the town come, and they demand that Lot let these 2 men outside. They want to have homosexual relations. They want to just rape these 2 men, and Lot won't let them. And so we kind of have something very similar happening in Judges chapter 19, but there's no angels involved in this chapter. And you'll see how similar it is as we begin to read it. Also in chapter 19, there's a Levite involved, a Levite, just like there was a Levite involved in chapters 17 and 18, but it's not the same guy. It's somebody completely different, so don't think it's the same guy we're reading about. It's a completely different story. Okay, so there's some background. So let's begin. We got a lot to cover to get finished. So Judges 19. Now it came about, verse 1, in those days when there was no king in Israel, that there was a certain Levite staying in a remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, who took a concubine for himself from Bethlehem in Judah. That doesn't sound right already, right? Okay, so here's a guy who's supposed to be part of the Levite priesthood, and God never approved of having more than one wife anyway for any of the Israelites, but especially those who are part of the priesthood. And he's got apparently a wife and a concubine, and so he's picked up this concubine from Bethlehem, verse 2. But his concubine played the harlot against him, so apparently she committed adultery, and she went away from him to her father's house in Bethlehem in Judah and was there for a period of 4 months. So she cheats on him. She probably leaves because the penalty for that would be death. Maybe she's afraid for her life. I'm just guessing here. And she goes back to her father's house, and she's there for 4 months. Verse 3. Then her husband arose and went after her to speak tenderly to her in order to bring her back, taking with him his servant and a pair of donkeys. So she brought him into her father's house, and when the girl's father saw him, he was glad to meet him. Okay, a couple of things to point out there. He's going to go and speak tenderly to her. So that's kind of odd, okay? So apparently he has some emotion for her. So he's going to speak kindly to her. But it's confusing because he's not going to be very kind to her here in just a little bit later in the story, okay? but he's going to be very kind to her. Her father was glad to meet him. Verse 4, his father-in-law, the girl's father, detained him, and he remained with him 3 days. And so they ate and drank and lodged together. And that was pretty normal. That was the custom. Hospitality was extremely important in that society. It's still very important in that society today. And so he was showing him hospitality while he was there. In fact, it continues in verse 5. Now, on the 4th day, they got up early in the morning, and he prepared to go. The girl's father said to his son-in-law, "Sustain yourself with a piece of bread, and afterward you may go." So both of them sat down and ate and drank together. The girl's father said to the man, "Please be willing to spend the night, and let your heart be merry." Then the man arose to go, but his father-in-law urged him so that he spent the night there again. On the 5th day, he arose to go early in the morning. And the girl's father said, "Please sustain yourself and wait until afternoon." So both of them ate. And when the man arose to go along with his concubine, his servant, his father-in-law, the girl's father, said to him, "Behold, now the day has drawn to a close. Please spend the night. Lo, the day is coming to an end. Spend the night here, that your heart may be merry. And then tomorrow you may arise for your journey so that you may go home." Don't know what his intentions were, besides maybe just not maybe he didn't want his daughter to go. I don't know that he had any bad intentions, but it sounds like he's not being honest, right? He's trying to keep him there for some reason, but we don't know why. Verse 10, but the man was not willing to spend the night. So he arose and departed, and he came to a place opposite Jebus. I've heard it pronounced Jebus and Jebus. So I'm not real sure what the pronunciation is, but it's the city of Jerusalem. But it's not called Jerusalem yet, and I'll explain why in a moment. And there were with him a pair of saddled donkeys. His concubine also was with him. And when they were near Jebus, the day was almost gone, and the servant said to his master, "Please come, let us turn aside into the city of the Jebusites and spend the night in the city." Okay, so here's this Levite who's supposed to be part of the priesthood, who's not. He's kind of living on his own, kind of like the guy we read about in 17 and 18. In fact, he's even got a concubine. She cheats on him, goes back to her father. He goes there to get her. He's got his servant with him, a couple of donkeys with him, everything he needs to sustain him for the trip. He finally gets away from her father-in-law, and as they pass what's going to eventually be called Jerusalem, his servant says, "Hey, let's stop here for the night because it's getting dark," and that would be the safe thing to do. Well, this Levite doesn't want to do that. He says, he probably doesn't want to stay with foreigners, right? He wants to go and stay in an Israelite city where he would feel safer. Going to be a mistake. These foreigners will probably treat him better than his own people are going to treat him, and we'll read about that in a moment. Now, a little bit of history about this city. This is this city, Jebus, will be Jerusalem in the future. It's right on the boundary where the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah come together, but it's yet to be conquered. So you still have Canaanites. These people, the Jebusites, are Canaanites. Jebusites just the tribe, but the Jebusites still live there. And Jebusites will live there, they will continue to live there until David becomes king. And then once David becomes king, he'll conquer the Jebusites, and he'll establish the capital of Israel in the city and then he'll name it Jerusalem, and that will be the capital city of Israel. But right now, it's still a Canaanite city, particularly the tribe of the Jebusites are the ones who live there. So he doesn't want to stay, and so he continues moving on until he comes to one of his own cities, or an Israelite city. Verse 12. However, his master said to him, "We will not turn aside into the city of foreigners who are not of the sons of Israel, but we will go on as far as Gibeah." Verse 13. And by the way, again, he's going to regret that. He said to his servant, "Come and let us approach one of these places, and we'll spend the night in Gibeah of Ramah." So they passed along and went their way, and the sun set on them near Gibeah, which belongs to Benjamin. So this is a city that's a part of the tribe of Benjamin. Verse 15, they turned aside there in order to enter and lodge in Gibeah. And when they entered, they sat down in this open square of the city, for no one took them into his house to spend the night. Now that sounds a little strange to us. But again, the custom in the Eastern societies, especially the Middle Eastern societies, hospitality is extremely important. And when you would walk into these towns back then, you didn't have hotels and motels to go into. And so when a stranger would walk into a town, it was common for them to show you hospitality. Somebody would show hospitality. That was important back then. And so you would go to the center of the city, and eventually somebody would come along and they would offer to let you stay at their home. And so that's what they're doing. They're sitting in the center of the town, and somebody should have, if they were living like they were supposed to be living, instead of doing what was right in everybody's own eyes, somebody would have offered them a place to stay. That was just how the society worked. And by the way, that's how the society still works today. And one of the examples I always think about is everybody's heard of Marcus Luttrell and Lone Survivor. Remember, he was the Navy SEAL. His team got wiped out. He's on the run. He's been shot up. He's been hurt. And all of a sudden, there's this man who finds him, who's part of a little village up in northern Afghanistan. And he takes him to his home, takes care of him, feeds him, protects him. Even if it cost him his life, he's going to protect him. That's part of that hospitality that still exists today in that Eastern society, Middle Eastern society. And so that's what this man's expecting, is somebody's going to take them in, and they don't do it. And that shows you how depraved the society is, even at this point. So verse 17, or verse 16. Behold, an old man was coming out of the field from his work at evening, and now the man was from the hill country of Ephraim, and he was staying in Gibeah, but the men of the place, were Benjamites. So this guy wasn't from there, but he was living there at the time. Verse 17. And he lifted up his eyes and saw the traveler in the open square of the city. And the old man said, "Where are you going, and where do you come from?" He said to him, "We are passing from Bethlehem in Judah to the remote part of the hill country of Ephraim, for I am from there. And I went to Bethlehem in Judah, but I am now going to my house, and no man will take me into his house. And yet there is both straw and fodder for our donkeys, and also bread and wine for me, your maidservant, and the young man who is with your servant. There is no lack of anything." In other words, what he's telling him is, I just need somebody to provide a place to stay. You don't have to give me anything. I've got our food. I've got supplies for our donkeys. All I need is a safe place to stay for the night, is what he's saying. Verse 20. The old man says, "Peace to you. Only let me take care of all your needs. However, do not spend the night in the open square. Not safe." You'll find out why in a moment. Verse 21. So he took him into his house and gave the donkeys fodder, and they washed their feet and ate and drank. So he's doing like they should do in that society. He's showing this stranger hospitality. Verse 22. While they were celebrating, behold, the men of the city, certain worthless fellows, surrounded the house, pounding the door. They spoke to the owner of the house, the old man, saying, "Bring out the man who came into your house, that we may have relations with him." Starts sounding like Genesis 19 here, doesn't it? That's what I was reminding you of earlier. So they don't want his concubine. They don't want the women in the house. They want the man. And I suppose maybe he's probably a young man in the house. And there's obviously one reason why they want him, right? When you read it, you get the idea exactly why they want him. It's interesting how people try to change the Bible, what it says. They say the sin here is not homosexuality, but a lack of hospitality. But obviously, you get what the sin is here, right? They're wanting to rape this man, is what they're doing, and we know that for sure because of what's going to happen next. But anyway, we'll get to that in a moment. So they're wanting to have homosexual relations with this man. Verse 23. Then the man, the owner of the house, so this old man who took them in, went out to them and said to them, "No, my fellows, please do not act so wickedly. Since this man has come into my house, do not commit this act of folly." Now look at verse 24. "Here's my virgin daughter and his concubine. Please let me bring them out, and you may ravish them and do to them whatever you wish, but do not commit such an act of folly against this man." So I guess the hospitality was for the man and not so much for the women. I don't know. But, obviously, I mean, back then women were treated more like property than they were people. And so this man is trying to make a deal with these men of this city so that they won't harm his guests that he's showing hospitality to. So a couple of things I want to point out in verse 21 I think is interesting. He offers his virgin daughter. He offers the concubine of this young man. And notice in the middle of the verse, there's a phrase I want you to pick up on. And the phrase in the middle of the verse is, he says, wait, I lost my place. Verse 24. He says, please let them, hang on, let me find a place. "Please let me bring them out, and you may ravish them." And notice this next phrase, "Do to them whatever you wish." What's the phrase we keep hearing over and over again in the book of Judges? There was no king in those days, and every man did what was right in his own eyes. So in other words, here these two women do whatever you want to do, whatever you think is right in your own eyes, right? So we kind of see that again in this picture with this. So now here's what's interesting. I told you it's a lot like Genesis 19, but here's the biggest difference. In Genesis 19, it was the city of Sodom. Lot was living in Sodom. Sodom was a Canaanite city filled with Canaanites. Lot was the foreigner there. It was the Canaanite men who were wanting to have homosexual relationships with the two guests. Now, this is an Israelite city. And these are Israelite men who are wanting to commit this homosexual act with this guest. And so now these Israelite men are acting like Canaanite men. You see how they didn't kill off these people that God told them to judge for him and kill, and now they're acting like these people. You see what's happening here? Now they're acting like them. Their value system has rubbed off on them, if you will. And so he says, do with them whatever you wish. Literally, do with them whatever's right in your own eyes. Okay? That's the repeated phrase that we have over and over in this chapter. Okay, verse 25. But the men would not listen to him, and so the man seized the concubine and brought her out to them. They raped her and abused her all the night until morning, and then let her go at the approach of dawn. So you can't even imagine what she went through that night. As the day began to dawn, the woman came and fell down at the doorway of the man's house where the master was until full daylight. So somehow she makes her way back. She falls at the doorway of the house, verse 27. When her master arose in the morning. Now remember, this is the man who went to speak kindly to her. So you kind of thought at the beginning of the story that he had, he loved her, he cared about her. If he had loved her and cared about her, he wouldn't have let this happen, right? Verse 27, when her master arose in the morning, verse 27, and opened the door of the house, he went out to go on his way. So he's going home, and behold, his concubine was lying in the doorway of the house with her hands in the threshold. He says, get up, let's go. Those are kind words, aren't they? There's no answer. You know why there's no answer? She's dead. She's dead. Doesn't say it, but that's my opinion. She's dead at this point. I don't think he kills her, but I think she's dead at this point. She was dying, but made her way back to the house before she finally collapsed and died. Then, middle way through verse 28, then he placed her on his donkey. So he placed her body on his donkey And the man arose and went to his house. Now, here's what he does when he gets to his house. This is interesting. It's in case you think it can't get any more gross or whatever. But when he entered his house, he took a knife and he laid hold of his concubine. He cut her into 12 pieces, limb by limb, and sent her throughout the territory of Israel. How many tribes are there in Israel? So guess what? Each tribe got a piece of the concubine's body. Verse 30, all who saw it, so in other words, each tribe who saw it said, nothing like this has ever happened or been seen from the day when the sons of Israel came up from the land of Egypt to this day. Consider it and take counsel and speak up. So he probably did this to cause outrage, and he did. He caused outrage. And even as wicked as Israel was at that time, when he sends this to the different tribes, they're like, this is pretty bad, okay? And so chapter 20, they're going to do something about it. That's what we're going to pick up in chapter 20. Now, here's what we're going to discover in chapter 20 as we go through this. This one man's sin, and I blame it on him. I think he should have died trying to keep this from happening. This one man's sin that cost the life of his concubine is going to end up causing the death of 65,000 men, okay? Because they're going to go to war. There's going to be a civil war because of this. So that's what we're going to read about. Look at verse 1. It says, then all the sons of Israel from Dan to Beersheba, including the land of Gilead. Now, just to give you a little something to remember as you read the Old Testament. Anytime you run across the little phrase, Dan to Beersheba, that's just like saying north to south. Because remember Dan, I showed you, I pointed out on the map, Dan is all the way at the very northern part of Israel, and Beersheba is all the way in the south. So in the Old Testament, when you're reading it, it says something like from Dan to Beersheba, it's basically saying from north to south. So all of Israel from north to south, and Gilead, those are the tribes that were on the other side of the Jordan River. They came out, and the congregation assembled as one man to the Lord at Mizpah. Now, what's interesting is it tells us that all of Israel, except the tribe of Benjamin, has gathered together as one. This is the first time in the book of Judges we've read that the entire nation of Israel has come together. Now, we've read where one or two tribes have gotten together to fight the enemy or fight each other, but this is the first time we've read that the whole nation has come together to fight. And they didn't come together to fight the enemy, they came together to fight their own brother. Right? That's what's sad. Kind of reminds me of churches, right? And I'm so glad that we have the unity and that we have in this church. So I'm not saying this because I see this here. I don't see this here. But I've seen it at other churches, and I'm sure you have too. The only time you see unity in some churches is when one group gets together to fight another group inside the church, right? And it's unfortunate that Christians will do that instead of seeing strong unity to fight the enemy. Many times you just see unity to fight one another. And that's what we're seeing here with the nation of Israel. So verse 2, the chiefs of all the people, even all the tribes of Israel, took their stand in the assembly of the people of God, 400,000 foot soldiers who drew the sword. So just keep that in your mind. So this army of Israel that's about to go and fight Benjamin has 400,000 foot soldiers. Verse 3, now the sons of Benjamin heard that the sons of Israel had gone up to Mizpah, and the sons of Israel said, tell us, how did this wickedness take place? So the Levite, the husband of the woman who was murdered, answered and said, I came with my concubine to spend the night at Gibeah, which belonged to Benjamin. But but the men of Gibeah rose up against me and surrounded the house at night because of me. They intended to kill me. Instead, they ravished my concubine so that she died. It's interesting he doesn't say I gave her to them. Verse 6, and I took hold of my concubine and cut her to pieces and sent her throughout the land of Israel, land of Israel's inheritance, for they have committed a lewd and disgraceful act in Israel. Oh, by the way, let me back up for a second. I meant to point this out. You know, when the men surrounded the house and said, send the man out, you know, there are those who want to say, oh, this isn't about homosexuality. The sin here is about the sin that was committed is They didn't offer hospitality to this man, right? Well, what was the rape about when they raped this girl all night long? That's not about hospitality, is it? This is about sexual sin, okay? And so it's exactly what it says it's about. We don't have to change anything. We don't have to reinterpret anything. The sin here is the sin of homosexuality. And it's pretty clear. I mean, you really have to, change things up to make this mean something that it doesn't mean. But I meant to point that out when people want to say, well, the sin is the men of this town committed the sin of they weren't being hospitable. That's the sin. And in fact, that's what they say about the men of Sodom. As they say, well, that's the sin. They were not being hospitable. It wasn't homosexuality. And so, but they prove what the sin is by what they did to this girl, okay? So anyway, I just meant to point that out because you'll hear that sometimes when people try to defend the sin of homosexuality as if it's not something the Bible speaks out against. But verse 7, behold, all of your sons of Israel give your advice and counsel here. Then all the people arose as one man, saying, not one of us will go to his tent, not one of us are going to go back home, nor will any of us return to his house. Verse 9, but now this is the thing which we'll do to Gibeah. We will go up against it by lot. In other words, we're going to see who should go first, and we're going to go by lot. In other words, we're going to go, like cast lots, if you will. That's kind of what they'll do. Verse 10, it says, and we'll take 10 men out of 100. And by the way, let me just kind of sum up what's going to happen here. Verses 10 through 14, they're going to try to meet with the Benjamites and say, give us the men who did this, turn over the bad guys, and we'll deal with them and not the whole tribe of Benjamin. But they won't do it. So they end up going to war with the whole tribe of Benjamin. So let's drop down to verse 15. I don't want to run out of time here. So verse 15, from the cities on that day, the sons of Benjamin were numbered 26,000 men who draw the sword, besides the inhabitants of Gibeah, who numbered 700 choice men. Out of all these people, 700 choice men were left-handed. Each one could sling a stone, notice, at a hair and not miss. In other words, these are snipers with stones. And a stone could be slung with these slings up to 90 miles an hour. Think about David. He killed Goliath. So, I mean, you could easily kill somebody with a stone. And these guys could hit perfectly. So they were like snipers, modern-day snipers, I guess you could say. Verse 17, then the men of Israel, besides Benjamin, were numbered 400,000 men who draw the sword. All those were men of war. So what I want you to see here is you have 400,000 soldiers against, those are the men of Israel, 400,000. The Benjamites, you have 26,700. So 400,000 versus 26,700. Now that's lopsided, and you think, okay, this is going to be a pretty easy win for Israel, right? Okay. Let's see how this turns out for Israel. There's going to be 3 battles, verse 16. Let's see, I read verse 16. Verse 18. It says, now the sons of Israel rose and went up to Bethel and inquired of God. Bethel's where the tabernacle was and the priests were. Here's what they inquire from God. Who shall go up first for us in battle against the sons of Benjamin? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. So they go to the tabernacle, they go to the high priest, all the tribes of Israel except for Benjamin, and they ask the high priest, hey, inquire of God which tribe should fight first, which tribe should lead the battle. They should have asked, should we fight? Should we even go to war? But they just assumed they were supposed to, and so they asked who should go first. And so the high priest, I assume, remember he has the Urim and Thummim, if I'm saying that right, the 2 stones that they would use to get a yes or no answer from God that we've read about in Leviticus. Don't know how they work, but I'm assuming that's what the high priest would do. He used those stones to determine who would go first. And let's see, I believe it's the tribe of Benjamin. It says in verse 19, it says, the tribe of Judah, it says, so the sons of Israel arose in the morning, camped against Gibeah. The men of Israel went out to battle against Benjamin, and the men of Israel arrayed for battle against Gibeah. And the sons of Benjamin came out of Gibeah and fell to the ground on that day, 22,000 men of Israel. It seems like I read there's somewhere here where it says that it was Judah. So, but get this in verse 21. So the 400,000 soldiers of Israel go to fight the 26,700 soldiers of Benjamin, and the little army kills 22,000 men of Israel. That's battle number one. That's verse 21. Go down to verse 26. By the way, there's a battle the next day, and 18,000 men of Israel are killed. So they lose again that battle. There's a third battle, okay? And we'll read about it in a moment, but drop down to verse 26. It says, then all the sons of Israel and all the people went up and came to Bethel. So they're back at the ark, at the tabernacle, and wept, and thus remained there before the Lord and fasted that day until evening. And they offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. Might want to circle that. It's the only time in the book of Judges you'll read that they fasted, that they made sacrifices the way they were supposed to make sacrifices. It's the only time it's ever done. And you know what? They'll win now, okay? Because they did things right, by the way. But verse 27, the sons of Israel inquired of the Lord, for the ark of the covenant of God was there in those days. Notice verse 28, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, Aaron's son. So this is the time of Aaron's grandson. That's why I was telling you earlier that this is probably early in the book. So they go and they inquire of the high priest. They make their sacrifices and all that good stuff. And then down, verses 29 through about 46, I'm going to skip, but I'll tell you what's happening. They go and fight Benjamin again. They set up an ambush. They get the men of Benjamin to come out of their town, and when they come out, they ambush them, and they're able to beat them. They pretty much wipe them out. Remember, there were 26,700 men of the army of Benjamin, and on that day, on that third battle, 25,000 of the men of Benjamin are killed. Okay, 25,000 of them were killed. So let's go down to verse 46. Verse 46, it says, so all of Benjamin who fell that day, 25,000 men who draw the sword, all those were valiant warriors. But 600 men, so there's 600 who survived, fled toward the wilderness to the rock of Rimmon, and they remained at that rock of Rimmon for 4 months. So there's 600 of these men who survived. They kind of find a stronghold where they survive for the next 4 months. Verse 48, the men of Israel then turned back against the sons of Benjamin and struck them with the edge of the sword, both the entire city with the cattle and all they found. They also set fire to all the cities which they found. So after they killed all of their soldiers, except for the 600 who fled to the desert to a stronghold, they turned around and went into all their cities and killed all the women and children, burned all their cities and killed all their cattle and just pretty much wiped them out, okay? They wiped them out. So these 600 who are left is going to form really the story for the last chapter that we're going to read. They're going to realize, Israel is going to realize that, hey, we've just wiped out a tribe, or we've almost wiped out a tribe. If we keep going, there's a tribe of Israel that will be wiped out. There will no longer be 12 tribes of Israel. There'll be 11 tribes of Israel. So they stop. They put on the brakes in chapter 21. They realize what they've done. But there's a problem. There's 600 men, and there's no women. And they've made a vow. We'll read about it. All the men of Israel have made a vow that they will not give their daughters to the men of Benjamin to marry. So how are they going to survive? How are they going to continue? So they basically have eliminated this tribe. So chapter 21 is how they're going to try to get this tribe to survive. So look at verse 1, chapter 21. It says, now the men of Israel had sworn in Mizpah, saying, none of us shall give his daughters to Benjamin in marriage. So in other words, when they found out what these men did, and they all got together to fight, before they went to fight, they all made this vow, we'll never give our daughters to marry these guys. So verse 2, so the people came to Bethel and sat there before God until evening. So they're back where the tabernacle is, and lifted up their voices and wept bitterly. They said, why, O Lord God of Israel, has this come about in Israel? Well, because you made the dumb mistake of doing it, right? So that one tribe should be missing today in Israel. It came about the next day that the people arose early and built an altar there and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings. The sons of Israel said, who is there among all the tribes of Israel who did not come up in the assembly of the Lord? For they had taken a great oath concerning him who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah, saying, he shall surely be put to death. And the sons of Israel were sorry for their brother Benjamin, and said, one tribe is cut off from Israel today. What shall we do for wives for those who are left, since we have sworn by the Lord not to give them any of our daughters in marriage? And they said, what one is there in the tribes of Israel who did not come up to the Lord at Mizpah? And behold, no one had come to the camp from Jabesh Gilead to the assembly. So apparently there were some Israelite men who did not come to help fight from this town called Jabesh Gilead. And so they come up with this plan to, let's just read it. Drop down to verse 13 and I'll show you what's going to happen here. It says, the whole congregation sent word and spoke to the sons of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon. And what happened, let me back up because I skipped it. But verses 9 through 12, what happens is they go to this town of Jabesh Gilead. They kill the men and steal the virgin daughters. Okay? So that's the right thing to do, right? Remember? I mean, it just gets worse and worse, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't, even when they're trying to do the right thing, they're doing the wrong thing. They're doing it the wrong way. So they go to some of their own brothers, and they kill them and steal their daughters. They steal 400 of them. But how many men are there that are left? 600. Okay, so verse 13. When the whole congregation sent word and spoke to the sons of Benjamin who were at the rock of Rimmon and proclaimed peace to them, Benjamin returned at that time and gave them the women whom they had kept alive from the women of Jabesh Gilead. Yet they were not enough for them. And the people were sorry for Benjamin because the Lord had made a breach in the tribes of Israel. Then the elders of the congregation said, what shall we do for wives for those who are left, since the women are destroyed out of Benjamin? They said, there must be an inheritance for the survivors of Benjamin, so that a tribe will not be blotted out from Israel. But we cannot give them wives of our daughters, for the sons of Israel had sworn, saying, cursed is he who gives a wife to Benjamin. So they said, behold, there's a feast. All right, so check it. Here's plan B to get the other 200 women. All right, y'all like this? This is a good plan too. So plan B, verse 19. Behold, there's a feast of the Lord from year to year in Shiloh, which is on the north side of Bethel, on the east side of the highway that goes up from Bethel to Shechem, and on the south side of, however you say that one. Verse 20, and they commanded the sons of Benjamin, saying, go and lie in wait in the vineyards. In other words, set up an ambush in the vineyards. And watch, and behold, if the daughters of Shiloh, the daughters out of the town of Shiloh, the virgin daughters of Shiloh, come out to take part in the dances, then you shall come out of the vineyards, and each of you catch his wife from the daughters of Shiloh, and go to the land of Benjamin. In other words, so when these young women come out for this Jewish celebration that they have every year, and you see these young girls who are not married, just grab you one. It'll be okay. Just grab one and bring her back to your town, and that'll be your wife. Now, these will be from one of those tribes, by the way, that they made a commitment that they wouldn't let their daughters marry. But this is how you get around that. Your daughter was kidnapped. You're not letting her, but she's kidnapped. There's always a loophole, right? You can find, how our government works, right? They always find the loopholes, right? Verse 22. It shall come about when their fathers or their brothers come to complain to us that we shall say to them, give them to us voluntarily, because we did not take for each man of Benjamin a wife in battle, nor did you give them to them, else you would now be guilty. And we're talking about the guilty of the oath they made. The sons of Benjamin did so and took wives according to their number from those who danced, whom they carried away, and they went and returned to their inheritance and rebuilt the cities and lived in them. The sons of Israel departed from there at that time, every man to his tribe and family. Each one of them went out from there to his inheritance. In those days, there was no king. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. They sure did, right? They did what was right in their own eyes. Now, so Judges is a book of contrast. It's in contrast with the book before it, Joshua, which we see a righteous man, not a perfect man, but he's a righteous man, a good leader. And it's in contrast with the book that comes after it, book of Ruth. And the reason I say that is because as wicked as everybody was in the time of the Judges, there were exceptions. Look at the very first verse in Ruth. It says, now it came about in the days when the judges governed. So when did Ruth take place? During the time of the Judges. And Ruth is a good story, right? Ruth tells us about some righteous people. So even though Judges, the times of the Judges is absolutely an evil period of time, there were exceptions, there were good people, and the story of Ruth is going to tell us that. It's going to contrast the book of Judges, and we'll begin that next week, okay? Aren't you glad we're through with Judges? Judges is kind of like Leviticus to me. Unless the Lord really impresses upon me very, very hard, I don't know that I'll ever teach through it verse by verse again. May teach through some of the good stories, right, that we all are familiar with, but man, he's going to have to really convict me hard to go through it verse by verse again, but I don't know. I may someday. All right, so with that said, prayer sheet, and before I forget, if you didn't already, our youth, they're having a fundraiser. They have these coffee mugs you can get customized with whatever. I guess you can get pictures or put on it or whatever. There's order forms, blank order forms. You can pick up in the, whatever that is out there. My mind is just blank. What is it called? Foyer, thank you. It's time to end when you can't remember the foyer. So prayer sheets. I've stolen all the pencils here. Anything we need to add to or update on our prayer sheet? Yes, sir. What's his name? One more time. Elwood. And you said cancer? All right. Any others? Shannon Dials? Okay. Okay. Do you know the name? You get a name? Okay. Okay. Kelly and Shannon Dial joined our church just a couple of weeks ago, and y'all may not be able to put a face and a name together just yet, but keep her daughter-in-law in prayer. Any others? Yes, sir. Okay. All right. All right. So that's a praise. And I saw your hand. Yes. Y'all remember the Cummings family? Janet's, would be your sister-in-law. Okay, Janet's sister-in-law passed away in North Carolina. She lived in North Carolina? Okay. Y'all remember Janet's family, especially those in North Carolina. Any others? Yes, sir, Mike? Greg Adams? His sister and brother-in-law? Brother and sister-in-law. Y'all remember Greg and his family? Any others? All right. Several of you have been asking about if I've heard from insurance. Finally found out today that MD Anderson never got my lab results. So they got them now. They got them. In fact, I got a copy of it myself. Insurance should approve it. I'm saying that. That's my opinion because my IgG level was 36, 38, and normal is between 100 and 400. So I'm thinking that's low. So IgG is, I think, how they measure your immune system. So anyway, so I'm thinking they'll approve that. So hopefully we'll hear something soon. And praise for Easter. I want to thank everybody for everything they did for our Easter service. A lot of you worked real hard getting this place ready, inside and outside. Thank y'all for all that hard work to make everything look nice and have the place prepared. And I tell you, you know, I've been a part of church services where we had to add chairs before, but I had never been a part of a church service where it was just wall-to-wall people like it was. We had